What if I told you that the same words you hear from someone who says they love you could also be the very tools they use to control you? Imagine a text bubble flashing on your phone. I need you to stay, or I'll be heartbroken. In the next heartbeat, a dark silhouette leans in and whispers, don't you dare leave. That moment feels intimate, yet it carries a hidden pressure. A recent study found that 78% of people have been pressured by a partner using at least one of these tactics, often without even realizing it. Do you recognize the hidden language of love, fear, and guilt? Stay with me. We're about to pull the curtain back. Picture a fast-paced montage of everyday scenes. A couple typing hurried messages, a boss leaning across a conference table, a friend asking for a favor that feels more like an obligation. Each scene is overlaid with a subtle red alert icon, a visual reminder that something isn't quite right. Welcome back to the channel where we decode the psychology that shapes our daily lives. I'm your guide, and today we're diving into emotional manipulation, a set of tactics that exploit our feelings to influence thoughts, decisions, or behavior, often without our conscious consent. It's the subtle art of steering someone's emotions so they act in a way that benefits the manipulator, while the target feels compelled, guilty, or even afraid to resist. This isn't just about romantic relationships. It seeps into the workplace, friendships, family dynamics, and even the endless scroll of social media. Whenever power meets emotion, there's an opportunity for manipulation to sneak in. Why does this matter? Because the cost of not recognizing these techniques is high. It can erode self-esteem, create toxic cycles, and keep you stuck in situations that drain your energy. When you understand the mechanics, you gain the power to set boundaries, protect your mental health, and respond with clarity instead of reaction. Think about a time you felt an inexplicable pressure to say yes to a request, even though you wanted to say no. Perhaps a colleague framed a deadline as a team goal that felt more like a personal ultimatum. Or a friend used the phrase, "I've always been there for you," to guilt you into covering their shift. Those moments are not isolated. They are part of a broader pattern that thrives on the three core emotions we'll explore: love, fear, and guilt. Love is often the most seductive weapon. It disguises control as affection. A classic line might sound like, "If you really cared about us, you'd do this." The underlying message is simple. Your love is conditional, tied to compliance. Fear, on the other hand, taps into our instinct to avoid danger. A manipulator may say, "If you leave, everything will fall apart," playing on the dread of chaos or loss. Finally, guilt leverages our internal moral compass. Phrases like, "I've sacrificed so much for you. Can't you at least try?" turn personal responsibility into a weight that feels impossible to drop. These tactics are not always obvious. They can be wrapped in humor, framed as jokes, or presented as concerns for your well-being. The key is to notice the emotional trigger they aim to activate. When you feel a sudden rush of anxiety, an urge to prove your love, or an overwhelming sense of responsibility, pause and ask yourself, what am I being asked to do? And why does it feel so heavy? Recognizing the pattern is the first step toward reclaiming agency. Now, before we go deeper into each technique, I want to hear from you. Have you ever sensed that a simple request felt more like an emotional lever? Share your story in the comments, because your experience can help others spot these subtle cues.
And if this insight is opening your eyes, hit that subscribe button so we can keep uncovering the hidden forces that shape our lives together.
Let's dive deeper into each of those emotional levers, because understanding the mechanics behind them gives you the power to spot them before they take hold. We'll walk through the most common phrases, the subtle body language, and the psychological shortcuts they exploit. Then we'll arm you with practical, low-stress ways to respond. Starting with love, the most seductive of the trio. When someone wraps a request in affection, they are appealing to the part of you that wants to be valued, accepted, and needed. The classic, "If you really loved me, you'd," is more than a tender wish. It is a conditional contract. The manipulator silently promises acceptance if you comply, and threatens withdrawal if you resist. Notice how the tone often shifts from soft to insistent, as if a gentle hand is suddenly tightening around your throat. The eyes may linger a fraction longer, searching for a sign of surrender. A real-world illustration. Imagine a partner saying, "I'd feel so hurt if you didn't come to my family dinner." The surface concern is about hurt feelings, but the underlying demand is for you to prioritize their social agenda over your own schedule. The moment you feel a tug of guilt, ask yourself whether the request aligns with your own values or simply serves to keep you tethered to their expectations. A helpful mental check is to reframe the statement, "I want to be there because I love you," versus "I'm asking you to attend so I can feel secure about our relationship." That tiny shift reveals whether the request is an act of love or a lever for control. Another love-based tactic is the future investment line. When we're older, we'll look back and thank each other for making these sacrifices. This sentence plants a seed of future regret, making the present choice feel like an irreversible step toward an imagined destiny. In reality, the future is uncertain, and the promise of gratitude is often a hollow promise used to bind you to a present demand. When you hear a phrase like that, pause and ask yourself, what would I do if the future never materialized? Would my present self still feel satisfied with the decision? Now, let's transition to fear, the primal alarm system that keeps us safe from danger but also makes us vulnerable to manipulation. Fear-based tactics thrive on uncertainty, catastrophe, or loss. A manipulator might say, "If you quit that job, we'll never be able to pay the mortgage," or "If you don't agree, the whole project will collapse." The language is heavy with doom, and the speaker often pairs it with a stern facial expression or a raised voice, amplifying the sense of urgency. The goal is not necessarily to convey a realistic threat. It's to trigger a fight-or-flight response that shortcuts rational analysis. A subtle variation appears in friendships. "If you don't help me move, I'll just have to ask someone else and we'll never hang out again." Here, the fear is social exclusion, a fear of losing the bond. By framing the request as a gateway to continued friendship, the manipulator compresses an ordinary favor into a high-stakes decision. The key is to separate the actual risk from the exaggerated one. Ask yourself, what is the real probability that the worst-case scenario will happen? Does the manipulator provide concrete evidence, or are they relying on vague, emotional language? Fear can also be masked as concern for safety. A parent might say, "If you go out late, something could happen to you," which on the surface is protective. Yet, when this concern is repeatedly leveraged to restrict autonomy, it becomes a control mechanism. The pattern emerges when the same fear-inducing phrase follows every attempt at independence, turning legitimate care into an excuse for limiting freedom. When you recognize this pattern, you can acknowledge the genuine concern while also asserting your right to make choices, perhaps by offering a compromise. "I understand you're worried. I'll check in every hour, and I'll be back by midnight." This response validates the emotional core without surrendering to the overreach. Turning now to guilt, the third pillar of emotional manipulation. Guilt appeals to our internal moral compass and our desire to be a good person. It often surfaces as a reminder of past sacrifices, unfulfilled promises, or perceived indebtedness. Phrases such as, "I've always been there for you, and now you're asking for help," or "After everything I've done, you can't even return the favor," are designed to make you feel morally obligated, even when the request is unreasonable. The manipulator may also use comparative guilt. "Everyone else is helping, why can't you?" This creates a sense of being the odd one out, amplifying the pressure. A classic guilt trap appears in family dynamics. Your sister already gave up her weekend to help, and you're just going to sit around. The underlying message is that you're selfish if you don't follow suit, regardless of your own needs. When you feel that knot in your stomach, pause and ask, is the request truly about my well-being, or is it about alleviating the manipulator's discomfort at their own sacrifices? If the latter, it's okay to set a boundary without feeling guilty. A useful script is, "I appreciate everything you've done for me, and I'm grateful. Right now I need to focus on my own priorities, and I'll help when I'm able." Another guilt-based technique is the moral high ground claim. If you don't contribute, you're basically endorsing the problem. This universalizes the responsibility, making you feel complicit if you decline. The reality is that complex issues rarely hinge on a single individual's action. By challenging the hyperbole asking, Is my contribution essential, or would it just be a small part of a larger effort? You can reframe the request in a realistic context and reduce the manipulative pressure. Now that we've unpacked the three emotional levers, let's talk about the universal signs that a tactic is at play. First, notice the speed of your reaction. If you feel an immediate, visceral response like a rush of anxiety, a sudden need to prove yourself, or a wave of obligation before you've had time to think, that's a red flag. Manipulators rely on these fast-track emotions to bypass the rational part of the brain. Second, pay attention to the language of "or else." Even when it's not explicit, the implication of negative consequences is often present. Third, observe the pattern. Does the same person repeatedly use love, fear, or guilt to get what they want? One-off incidents can be coincidences, but a pattern signals a deeper strategy. When you spot a manipulation attempt, you have several tools at your disposal. One of the most effective is the pause and reflect technique. Rather than responding instantly, take a breath and mentally label the emotion you're feeling. I'm feeling guilty, or I'm feeling scared. Naming the feeling creates distance and reduces its power. Next, ask a clarifying question. For example, if someone says, "If you don't come to the event, everyone will think you don't care," you could reply, "Can you tell me why my presence matters so much to you?" This shifts the conversation from an emotional demand to a logical dialogue. Another strategy is the reframing approach. Turn the manipulative statement into a neutral request. Instead of, "You're being selfish if you don't help," you might say, "I understand you need assistance. Let me know what timeline works for both of us." This acknowledges the other person's need without conceding to the emotional pressure. It also signals that you are willing to collaborate, but on terms that respect your boundaries. If the manipulator persists, it can be helpful to set a clear, concise boundary and repeat it if necessary. For instance, "I'm not comfortable discussing that right now," or "I need some time to think about this request." Boundaries are not about being rude. They are about protecting your mental space. Over time, consistent boundaries reduce the effectiveness of manipulative tactics because the manipulator learns that emotional levers no longer guarantee compliance. Let's illustrate a full interaction that weaves these concepts together. Imagine a friend saying, "I've been juggling 3 jobs, and I really need you to cover my shift on Saturday. If you don't, I'll have to quit, and that would be a disaster for my family." The emotional cocktail here includes guilt, the sacrifice they claim, fear, the disaster scenario, and an implicit love-based appeal, the expectation that a close friend would help. To respond, you could first acknowledge the feeling. "I hear that you're under a lot of pressure, and I'm sorry you're feeling that way." Then, you pause and label your own reaction. "I'm feeling a bit guilty hearing your situation." Next, you ask a clarifying question. "Can you tell me more about why this shift is so critical and whether there are other options?" Finally, you set a boundary if needed. "I'm not able to take the shift, but I can help you look for alternative coverage." This response validates the emotional component, reduces the manipulative pressure, and offers constructive assistance. It's also worth noting that manipulation isn't limited to personal relationships. In the workplace, managers may use performance metrics as fear tools, saying, "If we don't hit this target, the whole department could face cuts." While goals are legitimate, the framing can become coercive when it's tied to vague threats without clear data. If you encounter this, request concrete information. Can you share the specific numbers and the timeline for these targets? By bringing the conversation back to facts, you diminish the fear-based manipulation. Social media platforms are fertile ground for love-based manipulation, especially through likes, shares, and followers. The algorithm rewards engagement, and content creators often appeal to our desire for belonging. If you care about this cause, you'll share this post. The implied message is that your moral character is measured by your online activity. To navigate this, remember that genuine support doesn't require public display. You can engage offline or in private ways that align with your values without feeling compelled to broadcast every stance.